Excellent. All right. So we have some guests in. I'm sure others will join us as they find their way in through the login. Apologies for keeping everybody waiting. We had a few. We've now got Tyler dialing in from his phone, which is a success. So we get to see his face before we had the audio. And as lovely as your voice is, it's always nice seeing your face, Tyler. So welcome everybody to our virtual breach point. We are doing these sessions, recording them because we host these in person as a panel event. And Tyler has actually been on one of our panels in Melbourne at Land Forces. We did a breach point panel. I think you're on that. It was a very lively discussion in person. We get to have you one-on-one now and ask you all of the questions. So I'm going to ask you some questions and then ask anybody who's listening as well to ask any that you have. You can do that in the chat window on the right-hand side of your screen in Riverside, and we'll endeavour to address them as they come through. So please feel free to ask questions as they come to you. You don't need to wait to the end or anything. But I'll introduce, first of all, my name is Peter Ellis. My name's there on the screen, General Manager of Beaton Zone Venture Partners, and really excited to have the chat today with Tyler, who has spent years as Australia's man in Washington, leading defence engagement on Capitol Hill for the Australian Embassy. He was in the room when AUKUS happened. He now runs his own DC advisory firm, helping companies navigate the US defense market. Tyler, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor.
We've got a lot of questions. Obviously, the core focus of these discussions is any sort of information we can provide to founders who are looking to take their company's scale and enter the US market, and what is the best way to do that, the best people to talk to, the do's and the don'ts, the things that you notice in what we do right, what we do wrong, where we can improve. This is what we want to unpack today. So I've given a brief introduction about yourself. Did you want to share with us in your words what it is you do on a day-to-day basis and unpack and explain what your company does?
Sure. Well, I'll just very briefly, for background, I think some of the folks, have either met me before or we've engaged. It's wonderful to be here, and a massive thank you to Beaton Zone for putting this on. So my name's Tyler Jensen. I spent 5 years on Capitol Hill as a national security advisor. I worked for Adam Smith from Washington State. He's the top Democrat on the House Armed Services Committee. I was then poached to go over to the Australian Department of Defense. I worked at the embassy in Washington as a senior advisor. Worked there for 6 years. Happened to be there, right place, right time when AUKUS was announced, and my role became a negotiator on the agreement, but on behalf of Australia. So I was the one with the funny accent. Tremendously enjoyed my time. It was an incredible experience. So I've had the very good fortune of working on both sides of the alliance now. In early 2024, I left the embassy after the passage of AUKUS and co-founded Anchor and Arrow. We're a strategic consulting and lobbying firm here in Washington focused on defense tech startups. That is all we do. We were actually the brainchild of a venture capital firm here in the United States called AVC. The general partner, Joe Lonsdale, who co-founded Palantir, approached myself and my colleague about starting up a shop. Essentially, the genesis of it was looking to create a voice in Capitol Hill and in the Pentagon for defense tech startups as an ecosystem, obviously with a focus on AVC, but now we've evolved and represent companies both in and outside the AVC orbit. In terms of our day-to-day work, we have just signed our 16th client. We have 4 staff members on staff, specializing in congressional authorizations, appropriations, getting that defense funding directly to our companies, as well as trying to navigate some of the hurdles of international engagement. Because of my background. We have colleagues who have ran the sort of background prep work for the confirmation hearings of multiple senior members of the administration. So we've had a really fascinating a couple of years in business now. And we seek to help our clients both understand the political as well as the policy landscape, help them make strategic decisions about where to grow and expand, what landmines they need to avoid, and decisions that they could make now that will reap a lot of benefits in the future. We try to do that with startups earlier than normal. And that's because we believe, and we think we've seen this play out, that if companies start early in this government engagement side of things, they can actually cut 2 to 3 years off of that engagement lead time, which can shorten their timeline to funding, to policy outcomes, to shaping the strategic environment to be advantageous to their business. So with that, my focus is mostly on kind of engaging with the U.S. and I am just, while I own a company, I do not create defense tech. So I may be somewhat limited from some of your other speakers, but really interested in chatting about any and all things that I can. And I really look forward to the questions.
Not limited in knowledge at all. I think it's always about like who can we put in the room that has the various areas of expertise, and you have a really deep knowledge in this space in particular. You mentioned there's when you're working with startups or founders and clients of yours, you look at the landmines that they could be avoiding. Can you talk us through some of those landmines? Provide the most common things that are considered landmines in this process.
Yeah, that's a great question. One of the most common things that we see is, and this is, I should say, this is speaking kind of from our perspective. What happens oftentimes is that founders, very much unsurprisingly, are looking at the labor landscape for where they want to open up a facility. If you're a software company or if you're software defined hardware, you're looking at El Segundo, you're looking at, Los Angeles, you're looking at San Francisco, you might be looking at Austin, Texas. We even have one company that's in Seattle. That is the right decision for a labor perspective. What you run into is that oftentimes there's a mismatch between where you decide to set up shop and who actually represents those areas in Congress. So, what an Australian would call an electorate, we call them congressional districts. Unfortunately, in many of the areas that are sort of known as talent hubs, those members that represent those electorates are not helpful to you as a company. So, it creates a situation. Oh,
Sorry,
sorry.
on this, I know you're gonna continue on, but this point here in particular is something that Australians just don't understand because we don't have that issue here. So, I want you to go super deep on this to explain, like you said, not helpful in what way
Yeah,
and what does help look like if they were to choose the right area for
that's,
being in the influential space to connect with the right people, not
yeah,
thinking of labor.
absolutely. When we look at a place to expand or really where to set up your first office, one of the things that we look to is who represents that electorate. And so there's in our system, you have members of the House and Senate, similar in Australia, two senators per state, and then varying levels of House members depending on the population of the state. As you're looking at a key area, we're going to look at the House member that represents that district, as well as maybe a couple of the adjacent ones, and we're going to look at the senators. If those members and senators do not serve on any of the key committees in Congress, so House Armed Services Committee, House Appropriations Committee, Senate Armed Services Committee, Senate Defense Appropriations Subcommittee, even House Foreign Affairs or Senate Foreign Relations, especially for companies coming in from Australia or other allied countries. If they don't serve in those committees, their ability to help drive policy language for you, to help shape your strategic environment, to help drive defense funding, defense appropriations towards you is now very, very limited. And it sets you on the back foot, potentially by a couple of years. And oftentimes, what we found is that sometimes when companies do come and work with us, they've made an initial founding decision on other factors like labor and things like that. But then they have to kind of look to, do I need to open a satellite office somewhere else to basically have like a flag in the sand to say, hey, member of the House, member of the Senate who is influential, who can drive things towards my company, towards these outcomes. I want to, have a reason for you to listen to me. So we've had some companies that will open, again, satellite offices, other offices, or other companies, excuse me, will approach states. And sometimes we've been able to connect companies with state governments and their federal representatives, and they've been able to secure tax incentives, grants, other really positive business incentives to drive them to set up actually in that state and in that particular electorate. These members are politicians. They are thinking about jobs. They are thinking about reelection. So when they have a new business coming to town, people that are engaged and want to help work with them on good policy language, funding that can go to their constituents, that really is a net positive. So I would say that's one of the most common landmines that we see. Yeah, I'll stop there.
No, that's really helpful, and because it is just a very different way of operating than what we would to know here. When you say that, connecting with the right people who can drive defense funding or influence policy change work with the language. Obviously, that is for areas that haven't done it already. And where are the locations that do this really well? So the barriers are going to be lower, or you already have people who have paved the way as such. Where are some of the key locations that you would advise people working in defense, creating companies in defense go to for this very reason?
Yeah. It's difficult because each state represents its has its own pluses and minuses. For example, one company that we've worked with, they ended up they manufacture graphene, so it's sort of similar to like a carbon fiber. They can do a whole bunch of very very cool things with it. Well, we sort of sat down with them, talked things through, and figured out what they really need is a lot of space, and they need proximity to where you can mine some of the base materials for that. We ended up, sort of triangulating and finding out that not only could they get space, but they could get an audience with the governor and the two senators who were very interested in businesses setting up in North Dakota. Not exactly the front of everyone's mind for like a key a defense tech hotspot. But what they did is they were able to land millions of dollars worth of grants, and the governor took their meeting, in a week's time. I think that would be very difficult to do in California.
Okay.
So it is something that you have to be open-minded about. And again, I think one thing that we like to think about is like taking the membership rosters of key committees and overlaying them on top of your other decisions. And that would be like labor talent pool, space constraints, costs, access to airports, things like that. So it is a uniquely individual decision. I'll say off the top of my head, states that do it very well, Alabama is very well positioned. Unfortunately, a lot of other companies also know that and go to Alabama. Texas has become quite the defense tech hotspot. Some of our companies proudly headquartered there, including one set up in Austin, Texas, making boats, which is, for those of you who understand your Texas geography, Austin is not on the coast.
It's the
So
water.
yeah, bit of a bizarre place to put a boat manufacturer, but there's reasons for it. For companies that work in the special operations community and have really close ties with them, Virginia and North Carolina are oftentimes very good picks. And the states can be extremely business friendly as well. And to be frank, like going back to my original point, like there oftentimes are companies in that software arena where the talent pool really outweighs everything else. And they do make choices to set up in places like, California, Los Angeles, San Francisco, or Seattle. Seattle has the advantage of having my former boss who is very high up on the armed services committee to help out, and so you kind of get the best of both worlds. But yeah, it is something that each company kind of has to sit down with someone who understands this market and begin layering these pieces on top of one another.
It's almost like we need a map of all of the different states with what they do best. Like obviously, like you mentioned, talent pools are in certain locations, but the specific types of talent that a company might be looking for will vary across various states on where those where the various talent little micro ecosystems are existing, for example. So obviously, you help with this. And at what point do you normally meet with founders or clients as you have referred to them? Are they referred to you, or are you actively looking for clients who need your help sorting this out?
Yeah. Um, we're extremely lucky. We, by nature of being connected to ABC, who are a very active venture capital firm in the defense technology sector, simply by nature of that, we are sent quite a lot of clients, and we're extremely, extremely grateful for it. This sector is booming. I will say for any companies and founders that are thinking about entering the U.S. market, this is not so totally self-aggrandizing, and maybe it comes across that way. But I would encourage you to consider engagement with someone who does government relations or U.S. market entry early. Is it possible to do on your own? Absolutely, but our system is just so vast that it often is worth the money. I will put a small caveat on there is that not to demur, too many of my colleagues, but there are a lot of firms in the DC metropolitan area that have developed a business model really focused on larger defense firms. Think like the Boeings and Lockheeds and the Raytheons. And there's nothing wrong with that. They do an excellent job at what they do, and they're going to keep doing that. They are oftentimes ill prepared to meet the demands of a startup. We have tailored our focus to be on working directly with founders, CTOs, COOs, looking to get them in early in a far more personal and targeted way. because the company is not, 100 years old, in the sake of a Boeing. So yeah, it takes a different skill set. So I would just say, as you're engaging, as you're looking at people, really make sure that the individuals you're working with are comfortable and understand, like, what is it like to be a founder? What is it like to be a startup? It is a very different thing. In terms of when we engage with them, we've worked with companies before they've even incorporated, all the way through to, some of our older clients are 6, 7, 8 years old. I would say companies that are in those very early stages, understanding government, understanding the political and policy landscape, while it could seem like this sort of massive, gray cloud that's looming out there and it seems very difficult to demystify, it is worth your time, investment of time, to try to do that. It will pay dividends in the long run.
Could not agree more. Hence, we keep having these types of events and providing opportunities in lots of different ways so that we can share the information on this process, which can seem really daunting, especially being so far away, the need to go and be there on the ground. We can't iterate that enough. We can't harp on about the message enough to go and do the research. Just another question, then I'm going to go to one of the questions that's popped up in the Q&A chat there, but you've sat on both sides, the Australian Embassy and inside Congress. What do you think founders think matters, but it actually doesn't matter as much as they think it does?
It's a very good question. I will say this: there is an Australian sort of like cultural personality identity trait where there is fear and skepticism about engaging with government and asking for something. Because in the Australian system, you don't do that. Because you're all
No.
polite and wonderful people. And here in the US, what I found quite regularly, and I have had to tell this to multiple ministers and ambassadors. I say, like, this member or senator will be annoyed if you do not ask for something,
This
because
is
the
a
expect yeah,
big cultural difference, and I'm glad
yeah,
you're explaining it in this way. I think you said that we are polite, but I think it's the other way around. It's just absolutely not the norm to work with. Like
yeah,
there is a fear around it because normally it means something bad. You have to pay more or comply or
yeah.
do something that is a challenge for business opposed to people opening doors for you. So
Yeah, I encountered this a lot when I was in government. It was very frequent. Look, public servants are guilty of the same thing. To us, it comes off as very polite. You don't want to be obtrusive. You don't want to be seen as trying to. I frequently was told by the new diplomats, like, I don't want to be messing with foreign affairs. Like the affairs of a foreign government. Like, you're just asking for something. It's okay. That people ask all the time. You're going to be in a long list of other people, and we
mm,
want you to ask for something. So I would say, if you are worried about being direct, like, don't be rude, but being direct and being upfront and just kind of like laying your cards on the table is actually very respectful in our system, because it's like, okay, I now know why you're here. You've set out, here's my problem. Here's what I'm trying to achieve. This is the outcome that I think will come of that. I would love your help on X. That now allows those individuals in government to make a judgment call based upon the merits of your argument. You're not doing anything improper. I would also say that, what do founders think is important? Well, many founders, understandably, think that everything is important. They are juggling anything and everything. And I'm sure there's probably a lot of people in here who can relate to that. When you have to, worry about who's buying more paper towels. And by the way, the new software update needs to go out. What you have to understand is that in our system, most major muscle movements, in terms of policy and defense funding, take about a year. And so that's part of the reason why I encourage you to work early, because the earlier you do, that you basically have to tack a year onto what you're doing.
mm,
And sometimes what we're doing is a multi-year process, because if we're trying to effectuate, a somewhat larger muscle movement, we might need to start with one thing one year, see the results of it, build on it for the next year, go back to them and say, here's what happened with X, we got result Y. We now think that outcome next action should be Z, and that's what we would ask you to do. And again, that is completely acceptable, normal. Your competitors here in the States are doing the exact same thing. So please remove as much tall poppy as you can. I know that's very difficult, but don't be afraid to be honest, be friendly, but transparent, and ask for something.
Such good advice. And it is just very much going against our cultural grain or what we've known to be possible. So it is a whole new concept. And I'm very happy to keep sharing it over and over and over again. But also, when you use examples of how people have gone about this and the realistic timeframes is extremely beneficial for anybody in the journey, thinking about kicking off the journey and
Yeah.
understanding what that looks like in reality.
Yeah.
Yeah, the question I have around AUKUS, and I know this is a big topic for you. So, Australia, UK, US signed AUKUS. Does that actually open doors for Aussie founders, or is it more complicated than that?
I think it does. I will say this that the answer is complicated. I think that AUKUS, I use this anecdote a lot. Shortly after the agreement was announced, the ambassador came down and he was like, we just did this thing. We know it needs to go through Congress. That's about as much as we know. We don't actually know what needs to go through Congress. We don't know who has to sign off on it. We don't know. So if you could help us. So I went up to the Hill and then we talked about pillar one and then we talked about pillar two. And, kind of one of the points we made was, well, for this to work, really what we need is a license free export and re export environment. And I got essentially laughed out of the room. And why I like to say that is that, in December of 2023, we had a piece of paper that did that. And
Mm,
that's not happened in more than, 3, 4 decades for the US. And we were able to do it. That's a testament to what Australia and the UK bring to the table
mm,
in their relationships with the US. So that all to say, what I find is that you're going to have companies like Boeing, Lockheed, Raytheon, you name it, that are very comfortable in an export environment where they get what I call the big green check mark. So they either, they go to State Department, they say, I want to sell my big widget to Australia. Great. Here's the big green check mark. You've done all of the things that you need to do. They have very highly educated and very well paid lawyers who really like the big green check mark. Where I see AUKUS to be a tremendous advantage for Australian founders is if you are willing to jump through the hoops and get onto the approved user list for the exemption under pillar 2 and you find partners here in the US or in the UK that are also on that list and you actually do use the exemption, your technology, you can use that export and re-export exemption, that use can cut down months of time and it can cut down a lot of money that you would spend on waiting around and applying for licenses and doing things like that. So what I find is that I think AUKUS is an asymmetric advantage for small to medium firms because the primes don't really like using it. But what you have are governments on all three sides that expended significant political capital in getting this done. And so if they see companies that are leaning in and using the exemption, certainly when I was in government, we sought to highlight those companies because it was directly, the result of all of this work, time, and effort. Well, I strongly encourage Australian firms to utilize it whenever possible. And the other thing that I strongly encourage is if there are things that are not working, if you are running into headaches, I know from working now on the private sector side, the feelings about government and, like, oh, it just goes into a black hole and no one listens. You would be very shocked. You would be genuinely very surprised. There are a lot of people who put a ton of time and effort. I lost a lot of hair. Whatever I have left
listening,
is, what was
taking the
spared
feedback
by
on board.
yeah, and so you do actually have people who are gonna listen and take some of that feedback. Will it fix everything? Maybe not. But for example, I've had conversations with a couple senior officials at the State Department. We had a couple companies with a couple of issues. They resolved them in a week.
That's far.
It's extremely fast. I mean, that's
Mm,
like lightning speed compared to the way it's been in the past. So
yeah.
don't totally be disillusioned and let your scar tissue kick in. I know it's very easy to do that. I'm guilty of it myself, but I would just say that you actually have people who are willing to listen and help. It's just that a lot of people in government don't know how to speak industry. So sometimes it might take in some outreach on your part, but you think that, and I'm always happy to help
Be the
because
translator, which is
be the translator. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. But even just to connect people with the right folks, this agreement needs to succeed. It
Yeah.
needs to outlive me and everyone else. And so we should get it right now. And so feedback from companies that you all are starting, founding, and working with, that's the kind of feedback that they need.
Yeah, definitely. I'm going to can you see this question there? Popping up. So this is one of the listeners is asked a question which this one comes up a lot. So I'd love your perspective on it. So I'll show it again. As a founder of an Australian startup, is it necessary for me to open an American subsidiary to tap into the American market and secure American government contracts? Do I need to be present in the US? And how do I start the process?
Yeah. The short answer is yes. It's not required. Is it technically possible for an Australian firm to tap into US Defense Department contracts by simply being an Australian supplier? Yes. That is possible. We have things like foreign comparative testing. The department can purchase things directly from Australia. So it is possible. Your life becomes considerably easier if you set up a US subsidiary. Making that even more complicated is if any of your technology is ITAR controlled or has an export control
Uh-huh.
through Australia. And if your technology is classified or the data that comes off of it could be classified. I would definitely say, I won't name names, but there was a company when I worked at the embassy that came to us at multiple trade shows, specifically to me, and basically was like, great. Well, the one of the services really wants our stuff. That's fantastic. Who is it? Well, it's a colonel. Like, that is about 5 or 6 ranks too low, and really, it's like, "Okay, well, still they want your thing. Where's your headquarters?" "Oh, we have none don't have a headquarters here." "Do you have any US presence whatsoever?" "No." They took several years of kind of repeating this process, before they decided to set up a US entity, and to hire a US firm. That's when really things started to kick off for them, and from what I understand, they're doing much better now, which is great. I wish in an ideal world, the marketplaces would be far more integrated and the US would be far more readily able to procure things directly from Australia. It would be, a lot easier if it was all like a digital marketplace or something like that.
Mm.
There are some legislative proposals that we've been working on to try to maybe open that up, to try to look specifically in the classified space if there's a way to create access for startups who can read classified material to be able to see the classified requirements list for both the UK, Australia, and the United States. That has not happened yet, but these are some of the ideas that are kind of bouncing around. To the end of the question, how do you start it? It's difficult to say with certainty. It depends on the company. Are you heavy into manufacturing? Is this primarily software based? If you're a software company, you might be able to just hire 2 people here in the US and kind of like set up the licensing agreement so stuff can go back and forth, but you don't need that big of a presence. Whereas if you are making components for a tank, just making something up, it's a far larger capital investment to look at
Yeah.
at like a proper office here. So I don't want to take too much time on it. Unfortunately, it is something that is like very much up to a company decision. But I would say there are some very good firms out there to help you talk through it. One of the things that I would suggest is don't fall into the trap of just opening a Delaware LLC. I've seen multiple Australian firms do that. There's nothing wrong with it per se, but it doesn't actually get you anything because
Mm.
no member or senator from Delaware cares that you have opened an LLC in Delaware. They won't talk to you and won't be helpful. Whereas if you take the time to analyze the market, like we talked a little bit about earlier, maybe identify one where there's some political backing, the state will work with you. That could be worth your time to wait a little bit, but find the right spot.
One of my questions, I will wrap it up at the end because I'm not going to interrupt the conversation now. Talking about what are the most common reasons a good company fails to crack the US market, and pretty much you've listed everything in all of these other points. We're talking about picking the wrong location, not being ready or set up, not having the right resources, looking at areas for the wrong reasons. We'll be willing to have those conversations. Is there
Yeah.
anything else that you would add to that list that we haven't discussed already that explains why really good companies with great products still fail to crack the US market?
This is something that I've learned only since being exposed to this ecosystem. But what you're finding right now is I'm very comfortable saying that we're in a defense tech bubble. I think there's no other word for it. We are in a bubble. We're seeing tens of billions of dollars flooding the sector. A well-known Republican senior strategist, political strategist, told me that a rising tide lifts all boats, but it also lifts the driftwood. And so I do think we are unfortunately in a situation where we have amazing tech that is now being supported. There's also a lot of stuff that's either like vaporware or still a science project. What I think is helpful for Australian firms is if you can secure the backing of amazing firms like Beaten Zone, but also there's some other ones in Australia that are excellent, like Salus and Main Sequence and some others. We're very big fans of all of them. But there are probably 10 or so VCs here in the US that are the biggest spenders and the most serious defense tech investors. What I found is that you have a little bit of a champagne problem where you can take something and go find money. But if you don't find the right money, then you will probably fail, is what I'm starting to see.
Can you just explain the right money framing? What it looks like when it's not right?
So, what I would say is where I have seen VCs, and I'm not going to tell them how to do their job, but I'll borrow a VC as an example because that's what I'm most familiar with. They are extremely judicious about the investments that they make. Our head of defense investing, Alex Moore, I mean, I think he probably talked to 300 to 500 startups alone last year. And in the defense tech sector, I think we only cut maybe like 5 checks. They're very, very selective, but they do higher dollar amounts because of it. But what you see is when firms like ABC make decisions, it's not that they are saying, here's the check and we will see you at IPO or when you get bought out. It is they basically like wrap around you and are like, we're going to help you fill out your board. Do you need a CFO? Do you need a CTO? Do you need are we poaching software engineers from Anduril? Like, what are we doing? They are extremely adept at leveraging this is extremely important right now. The most successful US defense tech startups leverage the political relationships of their investors to their advantage. So they will go to the people at A16Z, Sequoia, Shield, APC, Catalyst, Bedrock, that's the majority of them. There's probably 4 or 5 more. And they will use those investor networks to say, like, what are the best ways for me to get in with like R&E or with S or with the services, or they may know the service secretary, they may know DepSec Feinberg, they pretty regularly they may have great connections in the White House or in Congress. VC kind of took that extra step and said, we're going to open a shop specifically to do this, which is how we came to be. So when APC does invest in a defense tech company, they're able to work with us from day one, which is, I think, a great model. And I'm sure it will probably be copied later. Point 72 and a couple of others have people that do similar things. But I find that, easy money is great. But where I see the companies that are really having a lot of traction is where they work with the savvy, well-networked, well-financed investors here in the US, because in this environment, it does absolutely open doors.
Yeah, understandably. So when you said, obviously, when there's companies working with 8VC or taking on capital and they get to then work with you, what does that relationship look like? How does the
Well,
engagement occur? Is it a case by case and who needs what, whether they actually do need to work with you, or is it?
yeah, it's not just like baked in as part of the offering. It's something that we put on the table as like an incentive is kind of, hey, if you would like to work with us, one of the things that we can offer is that we can connect you with our team in DC. Now, I should say the Anchor and Arrow, like we are a standalone LLC. We're our own operation. We're not owned by ADVC, but we are deeply tied to them and to their companies. So what we do is if they decide to cut a check, we then will oftentimes engage directly with the CEO, CTO, whoever it may be that's best appropriate, and we lay out what we do. So that would be customized engagement plans with the leadership to say, hey, what I like to say is if you could wave your magic wand and make something disappear or make something appear, what would you do? And
Yeah.
then we basically take that and then we figure out what the government nexus is and we work backwards until we arrive at today. And then we basically build out a plan, every like month this, we're going to do that. And here we're going to do this, and then here we're going to do that. Because kind of going back to what I said earlier, we really do like to look at things in a year-long cycle.
Yeah.
So whether that is trying to secure early RDT&E money for some of these startups, if you're able to secure a $5 million RDT&E ad in defense appropriations, or a $10 million ad, you may be able to skip a funding round. That's non-dilutive funding.
That's a big, yeah,
Um,
big advantage.
that's a huge advantage, and it
Mm.
also means that you're now playing with the other boys and girls who are trudging along to try to get to a program of record.
Mm.
Now, keep in mind that like $5 to $10 million in our system, that is at the lowest staff level of approval. Like in Congress, we're talking like we called it budget dust. Like that is a rounding error.
$5 to $10 million is budget dust.
That is budget dust. Yeah. So, we what we like to do, and most of my colleagues in this sector, we want to take really exciting tech and talk to founders and be the translator to go take that excitement and
Mm.
turn it into language that makes sense to Congress. And then we, again, going back to making that ask, we put something together that says, this is why it can make a difference. Here's how you can help. And this is the outcome that can result for not only US service members, but hopefully Australian and maybe British service members as well.
Such an important piece of the puzzle, that translation piece, but also you, like you said, create excitement around it. I know that there is a lot of founders also who, well, we Australians have the feedback regularly that we don't get excited enough, we don't sell ourselves well enough, we don't walk in with enough confidence comparative to a US founder. So that is feedback that we take regularly, whether people are taking that on board or not. I know that's definitely an area from improvement, but there's a lot of things that you've mentioned today that can go wrong, we don't do right, as in founders, when I say we. It's more, there's lots of different potholes that you mentioned, things that could take longer, wrong selections of area, people, resources. What is there specifically about Australian founders that give us an edge over the US founders? Is there anything that you've identified that we do well or better?
That's a great question. Couple things. I'll say one that Australia has made a strategic choice a number of years ago to invest in certain key areas, and one of those is quantum. And so, even in like circles that I wouldn't think know about this, it is pretty widely known that Australia is like the world leader in quantum. Aside from it's like Google, IBM, and then Australia, which is amazing. But that was also again a strategic decision made by the government to invest money, and I think it should be celebrated. Australia does a great job of investing in that base level of research. There's a lot of stuff that foundational science level stuff. I seem to find a lot of Australian companies just like light years ahead of a lot of American companies. What I think is sometimes difficult is taking the foundational science stuff where it's like this new coding for something could revolutionize 50 different things. And I've had to say, like, that sounds amazing. What exactly do you want? Like, what is the pick your top two right now? Like, you want to put this coating on propeller screws on submarines, or do you want to put it on an airplane, or do you want to put it on a tank, or is it like so I think sometimes it's important for the Australian founders, if you do have something that comes from that foundational science world, like early TRL, being able to identify key outcomes of where you think this is going to have the most chance of success and a good size addressable market that's ripe for disruption. And it really something what you made is very unique. Um, it's important for you to sharpen your argument tighter a little bit.
Mm.
That's something that I've kind of found. But I will say that when I've had success with having American policymakers, lawmakers, et cetera, being able to sit down and kind of like dive into some of the like core technology and why this is different, people are very, very interested. It's just that oftentimes they get kind of like lost in a bit of the tall grass. They need to just have it be sharpened down a little bit.
Yes.
I'd also say, and this is more, sort of big thinking here, the US Australia alliance matters a lot to certain members. The US's alliances in general matter a lot to an even broader audience of members. The US is looking at an increasingly fraught strategic environment. That is news to no one on this call. And despite, certain verbiage out of this administration, there's still a broad acceptance that the asymmetric advantage for the United States when it comes to countries like China is alliances. That will remain to be true. So what you do actually have is a situation in which Australian founders can tap into that broader national security argument. That by integrating and expanding, what you're doing is leveraging AUKUS. You are tapping into the comparative advantages in the two systems, working to close supply chain gaps, and you're also creating a system of redundancy and resiliency if there were to ever be some kind of a conflict because you have distributed technology, manufacturing, and things like that. Those may seem like very esoteric concepts, but it actually lands and it can help open the door. It's a unique argument that isn't just, here's my widget, can I have money? Which is what a lot of American companies end up doing.
Yes. I think, look, a lot of Australian founders do that as well, but there is just highlights the level of research required. Go and investigate the markets, understand it more. I think a big part here is language, ensuring you've got the right language. I mean, you do a large part of that role of translation between various parties to ensure we're all saying you're saying the same thing and to the right people that matter and having the biggest amount of impact. And there's a lot there that I know that founders need to upskill on. I just wanted to give one last opportunity for the audience if they wanted to ask a question to Tyler while just drop it into the chat there. But I've just got, oh, here we go. So Patrick says, thanks, Tyler, for the talk. Super helpful. I'm working on a sovereign materials and manufacturing capability in Australia and intend to utilize the benefits of AUKUS as the policy tailwinds have given me certain advantages in connecting my product manufacturing between the two countries. I just want to know if there are specific people I should be talking to about this, or if I could have 15 minutes of your time to explain my company situation. So that was one of my questions, is if people did want to reach out to you, what is probably the best way to go about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Anyone, please feel free to reach out to me. I want to say big shout out to Jake and the Bean Zone team for managing the Signal threads. I think they're fantastic. My email is Tyler Tyler at Anchor Anchor arrow.com. So Tyler at anchorarrow.com. Please feel free to shoot me a note. And I am in several of the Signal threads, so you can also look up my name on there. Always happy to chat and save a few minutes. In terms of who you should talk to, quite frankly, the Australian system has done a pretty good job of setting up a few offices to try to help. So Austrade is wonderful. The Austrade team at the U.S. Embassy here in Washington is really well run. They do exceptional work. The defense advocacy folks as well. So you're talking through like CASG and things like that also do an exceptionally good job. If you're interested in kind of the more like private sector market entry, or where should I set up my factory and stuff like that, they're going to have some of that information. In fact, Austrade actually has a pretty good lay of the land in terms of like, these are where Australian companies have set up and invested. And these are some of the state legal environments that we're familiar with. And these are some of the VCs that we work with and banks that we've worked with. And it's like, here's who we can kind of like recommend and give thoughts, tips, tricks, and stuff like that. So I definitely would suggest that. Depending on the technology, it's probably good to meet with the Australian government to look at like maybe the policy landscape that you're going into. They might be able to give you a little bit of a heads up, like that's something that we're already working on, or no, that's not something we're working on, but maybe it's something that this office would be involved in over here. If you're trying to kind of jump in at like, should I go to acquisition and sustainment next week to talk to them about my widget? I would probably say hang tight, maybe do a little bit of research first before you kind of get to that stage. But when you are ready, there are offices that'll be very excited to listen, both in the Pentagon and in Congress.
Great advice. When are you in town next? When are you coming to Oz anytime soon? Any event?
Well, it was 40 and humid today, 40 centigrade, and so I'm ready for maybe like a cooler Australian temperature. So I'd go on a plane tomorrow if I could, but I reckon it'll probably be the fall U.S. time, so maybe September. I'm hoping to get back down there, but I miss it very much. I am very proud to say I've been to every state and territory, and I love the country so much I named my dog Sydney. So
Well, look, we do have a one-day defense investment conference called Revelli happening in September. So I will send you the information to that. So if you want
oh,
to
fantastic.
hide in with your September visit, we would absolutely love to have you.
That's great. I really look forward to that. Thank you so
We can
much.
give you all the break from well, it's going to be on the Gold Coast, so it's not going to be
Oh,
cool, but it's definitely not going to be summer humidity yet.
I'll take it. I'll
You'll
take
take
it.
excellent. Tyler, thank you. There has
Thank you.
been a lot of information, a lot of key points here. Somebody else just sharing your email into the chat there, just making sure that they got it right. But I did also mention to reach out on LinkedIn as well as Signal. There is a lots of information to take on board. I really do hope people listen to these, take a lot of notes. This will be shared as a recording on YouTube, so that if you want to watch and listen back, you can take notes and run a note taker if you want, and mark down all the key information, because it is super valuable. You can shorten that time frame significantly if you go about it the right way. So appreciate you, Tyler, and everything. And each time you come and share information with us, it's extremely valuable. Thank you.
Oh, well, I'm honored. Thank you so much. And hope everyone has a great day.
Excellent. Thanks so much.